Thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry for the faulty link there.
I was sitting in a perpetual
Sitting in the waiting room waiting for us.
Yeah.
Well, we are so pleased to have you here, Kara Swisher. Thank you for doing this with us today. We've got all kinds of folks here from across campus joining us, students, faculty, alumni. So thank you. And we are so pleased to have you here. You are the host of On with Kara Swisher, co-host of Pivot. You have a new book coming out, Burn Book, A Tech Love Story in the spring. And you've interviewed just about everybody that we would all dream of interviewing. So let's just get right to it. You were at the White House this week.
Yes.
For their AI event. I'd love to hear kind of what you thought about that event and their plans on AI.
Well, it was interesting because it was actually quite a comprehensive. You should read it. What's going on? They sort of touch on everything, and there's lots of elements. Unfortunately, the real story is that Congress hasn't acted at all ever on any internet legislation, and so I know a lot of people don't like regulation or legislation, or they think that the government, goes too far. But there's no legislation, zero. Not one piece of legislation that covers the internet or any of its inventions since 25 years now. There's not privacy legislation directly attributed. There's no algorithmic transparency. There's no bias. There's no data information policies, et cetera. And so that's really ridiculous. That's, I think, I have more regulations on me than the richest people in the world and the richest companies. And so it was good that it had a comprehensive idea of where it's going in terms of impact. It covered everything, though. It covered cybersecurity, bias, dangers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think they're thinking really thoughtfully about it in the Biden administration and throughout. There's a very bipartisan group of people who really understand. Despite the lunacy of Congress right now, there are people who are trying really hard to govern rather than just put themselves on Instagram and get likes, essentially, which is much of what's going on right now for a lot of people who are noisier than others. But there's a lot here to look at. You have to sort it out, like what's going to get cost. It's asking the government to focus on obviously cybersecurity and attacks, the very worst things that could happen, bias and things like that, and then hold the companies to account for safety, to test these LLMs, et cetera. And it kind of really sits in the middle of whether about open source versus closed, which the closed systems are more amenable to big companies. And they would, of course, like no open source because then they can control everything. And everyone has their arguments, whether it's the doom scrolling arguments or the positive arguments. But it's a good first step in terms of setting the table and showing that the U.S. has some leadership here. Right now, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is in London. I think it's Bletchley Park. I think that's where a lot of computing started with the Enigma machines, when they were dealing with the Enigma machines. She's there to show that U.S. cares about safety, cares about privacy, trust, and also is leaning into innovation and things that could happen. Everything they did show everything from gene folding to weather patterns to things like that. I'm just gonna plug in my computer for power here. That will be important. I'm really sorry, my computer. One of my kids unplugged my computer.
No problem.
And it could be any of them. There's so many. Okay, there we go. Okay. So anyway, so I thought it was good, and everybody was there that needed to be there, and it was represented by a lot of different groups. Education. I was sitting in front of Randy Weingarten from the Teachers Union. That was a very small mention of education, but even she leaned forward and said, "We're not against this for once," because I'm always like, "You're so against all the technology stuff," and they're all looking at it as a hope. Hopefully, this time we can get it right.
So I've heard you say that you're not afraid of AI. You're afraid of the guys who run AI.
Yes, it's all
Can you
guys.
explain why?
Because I think people can use it for malevolent means, just like all the other, it's like even more sophisticated internet tools. And you've seen all the damage already from social media, et cetera. It runs the panoply, and I'm not a negative. I love tech, but there's no denying issues around addiction, around misinformation, around the distrust in government, etc. And so I worry about the people who use these tools. And if we have guardrails in place, we don't have any for the first era of the internet. It's a problem. It's a real problem because malevolent players are already using them. What's happening in the Israel-Hamas conflict is very obvious. How much misinformation is being used, whether it's over TikTok to do influencing, to inaccurate videos, to just putting up heinous videos of tragedy for people. Can you imagine if World War II was broadcast fully? Like, and some people like, that's a good thing. We could see the horrors of war, but people could manipulate it in ways that are, very problematic. And, you kind of wonder what could happen if everything is equaled, right? And it's not equal. Life isn't equal. And I know, unfortunately, what happens is our society is reduced. It's reductive, and everybody has a reductive thing. And that's really a problem. That's really a problem of not being tolerant of other people's views, not being tolerant of being able to have discussions about really difficult topics. I was just listening to Yuval Harari talk about this. You have to be able to have complex ideas and two different ideas in your head at the same time. This conflict is a perfect example of that. But everybody just goes right to, you have behavior in the streets that used to be much more civil, I guess. And I get why people don't want to be civil. I do. And then you have what happens on the internet, which is a toxic waste dump where people really mistreat each other, or feel that not everybody does, but there's a lot of, everybody just has their, it's sort of like the purge. Like, I think I'll kill people today, essentially. This is metaphorically speaking. And then it spills back into real life. And so, it's just the casual cruelty that lives online has now jumped into real life. And I think it wouldn't happen without the behaviors that people have in real life.
There was one positive thing I heard you talk about with Martha Stewart, who said she was thinking about AI and wanting to get into AI.
Martha AI.
Like, hey Martha, as opposed to hey Alexa or hey Google.
What do you think? Smart. I love that idea. I love it. Look, Martha Stewart has a body of content. One of the things that's interesting about the AI stuff is provenance and knowing where it comes from. And that's important in this, because this is not just search that you can point to links. It goes deep down into the information. So who owns it, where it's from, if it's accurate, what's the data they're using to create whatever answer they give you. And in her case, she has a body of work that's just Martha Stewart's. I think she owns quite a lot of her content. And so why not create? She doesn't remember how much bleach it takes to get out whatever stain, or how to blanch cucumbers. And if it's there, why does she have to search? Why do you have to search it? AI can find it and put it in her words in the way she talks rather quickly. And we don't know what people, the great genius of Google is, answers are made by questions, right? People asking questions. You don't know what their questions are going to be. But so that adds to Martha Stewart is editorial top down. And so I'm going to do blanched computers. Well, anyway, she was going to do blanching whatever vegetable she blanches. I don't blanch vegetables, cucumbers. But what could you do if you had an idea? I want to do this and then this, right? And then pull out the information. Martha Stewart wouldn't necessarily make that and put it in a magazine, but the AI can, and your own imagination can.
So we've got a lot of students here who are a cross-section of everything from journalism to business to law to computer engineering, computer science. What are some questions they should be thinking about when it comes to AI as they're studying and potentially either going into this field or covering this field?
Well, they have to think about, are they journalism students or what?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, it's going to change rather drastically. I mean, layoffs, like it's smaller, I think smaller, quicker, more nimble journalism outfits. You have to be entrepreneurial. A lot of the stuff that everybody does, not just journalists, but lawyers or accountants or doctors. This is the white collar people that are being affected this time, because it's an information tool, very similar to what happened when we shifted to automated manufacturing or automated farming. It's the same thing. It's an automated version of a lot of information workers' jobs. And a lot of what journalists do, not everything by any means, is rote and does not need to have a person do it. And, like headline writing or, sports scores, or there's all kinds of things. But what journalists should be able to do then is focus on the important stuff, which, investigations, features, create more creative endeavors. And so it opens up more creative endeavors. It just because of and it does save money, but the way it saves money is it cuts costs by cutting staff. And so it could be an economic boom for some journalism assets, which have been, look at media as a shitty business right now, right? So it's not like it's a great business. We all know that. But it could get better because the cost saving comes from not having more nimble, small things. And you see them all. We started All Things D. People are doing versions of it all over the place, whether it's local or international or newsletters or blogs or whatever. I guess they're still called blogs, but there's all these Puck or the Information. They're all sort of grandchildren of All Things D in a lot of ways that I created. But you're going to see that happening. And so the big companies don't necessarily have the advantage. You can do a really good business by yourself. That's harder and it's more risky and it's more entrepreneurial. But it's really, you're not going to go to a big news organization as much as you used to. You're just not. That's not the way. That's not the path.
Well, can you talk to us about your career? Because you did start a big news organization, starting out at the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal.
Well, I didn't start out at the Post, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. No, I started off at the city paper, Washington, D.C. I worked for the Post as a stringer when I was in college.
Yeah.
I had a more traditional path, and I had a less traditional path because I didn't want to go to a small newspaper in a small Southern town because I was gay, and that was not possible. I know, look, it's back again with someone like it's back again, the sort of haters, but it was really bad. And so you couldn't live places, like I had to make decisions like that. And that certainly changed, but I had to start in big cities. Really, I had to live in more tolerant places, essentially, back in the 80s. Changed, of course, after AIDS and other things, but that's how I made my decisions, right? But I started at the Washington Post and I worked my way up. I worked in the mailroom. I worked as a stringer. I worked, in small jobs, really small jobs, and I just worked my way up. And when I was at the Post, I started covering the internet. And the minute I saw that, I really understood the economic implications more than most people for what was going to happen to media. I had already covered retail, and it was already hard hit by big chains like Walmart from local. There were a lot of local discount stores, et cetera, department stores that were closed because of Walmart and Kmart and Target, et cetera. And that changed the economics. They didn't advertise in local media. So Washington Post was local media, it was city media. It really died really quickly. Washington Post did survive, but it's owned by a billionaire now. Anyway, so I worked my way up, but the minute I got to the Wall Street Journal, which I thought was in a safer economic zone, I always kept thinking about where the economics were going. As soon as I understood what was happening with the internet, I wanted to create my own company and have control over my destiny. And so that's what I did. Like I did very, very early. I understood, and I needed to have link my revenues to my product so that they couldn't say, we're going to just lay you off. And if I'm making them millions of dollars, they don't lay you. Like, no, you're not. And then I wanted to own it. And that's where I moved eventually to, which was, you have no say over my destiny, person.
Can you explain how your company works now with owning the IP and all the various?
I own some of it. I have different deals for different things. Like I don't have a television network. I'm about to announce a TV show I'm doing. I'm not going to do a TV show. I could do a YouTube show. It's a lot of work. I just am old. I have 4 children. I don't feel like doing it. But if I was doing it now, I might start have a network on my own, right? I might using YouTube or maybe not so much TikTok, but YouTube, I think is a place the young people are getting their stuff. Or if I was a young person, I would do that. I'm just tired. So I do enough stuff. I have a lot of jobs. But podcasting was like that. I started it when it was in its nascent stages. I started the podcast division of Vox because I really did see that actually Steve Jobs in an interview mentioned it to me, and it struck my mind. I was like, oh, he's right, about where this is going. And so I created that. And then when I was doing that, I demanded, including at the conferences I did, a portion of the revenues, of the profits, based on a variety of different things. But more and more, I began to realize I didn't need my partners as much. They were coming for me and Walt Mossberg, or me, or for my podcast, or me and Scott Galloway. And so we realized we had the upper hand in that regard, is that, we'll just go elsewhere. And there were enough inexpensive tools to make things on our own. We're not unlike, it sounds stupid, but makeup influencers, right? Like, they're great. They're entrepreneurs. Well, we're news influencers, right?
Yeah.
In a way, but we're not. We're journalists. I'm a journalist. Scott's not a journalist. But so each product I make, I have a different economic. I think about it and like, where's my leverage? What can happen without me? What do I need a partner for? In the case of both On and Pivot, we partner with Vox Media, which sells our advertising. I'm not interested in hiring advertising people. I could be.
Yeah.
I didn't like it at one point. But it was, I pick and choose depending on the business. Right. And so that's just what it is. Right now I'm thinking about, there's a lot of people, at All Things D, we did a version of the newsletter business and then got out of it for a little while. We sold it. Now I'm like, oh, newsletter business. Now look at all the newsletters. What can I do here to make more money than they do? And I have ideas and I'm a better entrepreneur than most reporters. So I don't know if I want to do it. How would I do it? Who would own the thing? Where would the money come from? I'm very cognizant of linking revenue to product. So many people don't want to think about these things, but I do, because revenue is power. Money is power. I'm sorry to tell everyone in the audience, but if you are the subject to other people's whims, you're kind of screwed. Like, you're just screwed. And so I don't particularly feel like being screwed. And I'd like to, if there's a risk, I'd like to control it more. And so I tend to make different deals, whether it's a stock deal or revenue split. But I own the IP of what I make now, because I've done thousands of interviews that are owned by Rupert Murdoch and Vox Media. Well, or then the New York Times, I don't care for them to own them anymore. I don't know why I don't know what they give me that is so great that I should give them my work. I don't, so far, I'm the only person necessary, as far as I can tell, in the stuff I make. And I know that sounds egomaniacal, but it's like a startup entrepreneur. If I didn't think it up, it wouldn't happen. People wouldn't be employed. And so that's how I look at it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your interviews. You've mentioned Steve Jobs. You've interviewed Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, President Obama. A lot of people wanted to know in advance what's been your favorite interview and your least favorite, but I'm also curious for our students, how you prepare for these interviews, how you get ready.
Oh, it depends on the interview. Like, some people, I could walk into an interview with Mark Benioff and just do it off the top of my head. I know what he's doing. I'm paying attention. I spend a lot of time reporting and talking to people about the various industries I cover. I certainly know who to call right away to get a good sense of it. Like, I could probably do a Tim Cook interview rather. I'm very aware of what Apple's challenges are. I talk about them every week. So the tech interviews, I don't really need a lot of prep, right? I do some, but I really know, right? I've spent 30 years covering them. It's not really sort of like a doctor who knows how to do heart surgery. I just know how to do heart surgery. I may read new journals or new things, but really, are you going to tell me anything that I don't know? And I can figure out what's important. I pay attention to other people's interviews sometimes. It depends if I think I see something that was interesting. Like I did one yesterday that I didn't prepare for at all, but I knew the guy and I knew the topic. And it was a fantastic interview because I really already knew. I'm keeping up, with the kids essentially. And so in some cases though, I did Castor Semenya, I think it's Semenya is how you pronounce it, who was the runner who had, that was the big controversy over, I'm not going to name her. She calls herself a different woman, but she's a woman. She was born a woman. And obviously the people from the World Athletics Association have tried to, it's not a trans issue. It's an actual biological issue. In any case, it was really interesting. I don't know a lot about that topic. So I read the book. I studied it. I actually, after reading the book, not just reading the book, but reading a lot about it, I thought, who is this asshole at the World Athletics Federation? She's born this way. Like, it's really ridiculous what they, what they've done. And also so much focus on a woman. Why aren't they regulating Michael Phelps's arms? He's genetically weird. His arms are weird. Or, he doesn't have as much lactic acid. Should we regulate his lactic acid? No, we never think of that. So anyway, the focus is so obsessed with testosterone. Anyway, it was just interesting. It just, as a person just coming to it, I was like, this makes no sense, that kind of thing. But I read widely. I read people who agreed and disagreed. I spent a lot of time reading people who disagree with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was good. I was like, all right, this is interesting. This is ridiculous nonsense. I'm a smart person. I can analyze things. And then I watched a lot of races because I really want to understand her impact on racing and everything else. And I read a lot from the other athletes who feel that she had an unfair advantage due to her birth, essentially. And so it was interesting, and we had a great discussion. Now, she happens to be someone who's really answers questions, so it was pretty easy. And then we have a staff who comes up with questions, and I edit them. Once I get them, I edit them to my liking, what I'm good at. I tend not to talk about things I don't know about, and I say it. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. Please explain it to me. Although I do know a lot more when I go in. I don't go in dumb, right? It's really insulting and disrespectful to the people you're interviewing. I try to interview people I don't like or I don't agree with a lot. I end up forming really interesting rapport with certain people. Ken Buck, oh my God, literally couldn't disagree with him more on anything, but he's a really smart, thoughtful person. I think some of his policies are terrible, but we argue over them, and we have what I call a civil argument over them. I don't lump him into the school of really wants to, he's a compromise person. Everybody can compromise. So anyway, so I try to have people I disagree with quite a lot. And then I try to question my own beliefs, but I also enter my beliefs into it. Like, why pretend? I'm sort of the Christiane Amanpour school of truthful, not neutral. Ultimately, you have a point of view based on your reporting, and that's what I have always thought that I've created at All Things D. Was I called it reported analysis. We did the reporting, and then we came to a conclusion. You might not agree with our conclusion, but we did the reporting. Maybe you should too. You know what I mean? And I don't think we cherry picked. I don't think we did things like that. And so that's what I tend to do. I think Christiane is, who's a friend of mine, is someone I really look up to in that regard.
Yeah. Who have been some of your favorites and least favorites to talk to?
Well, I just interviewed Christiane. It was a really good and difficult interview. She's really, there's whatever she reports, the other side is like, you're a Zionist, you're pro Hamas. She's just like, no matter what she does, she's sort of, it's really just even the difficulties of that reporting right now are really quite significant. But you do what you do, right? You do what you do. I think she's doing a very good job. I'm trying to think, who do I like? I like everyone's I've interviewed. I can think of one that I disliked. So I really liked it. It's going to be a surprise, an interview I did with Monica Lewinsky. Here's someone who's not particularly relevant, but she is in so many ways such a touchstone. I had noticed and spent a lot of time watching her with things she was doing. She's the only person who didn't write a book on that. She's the only person who didn't cash in. There was no book. There was no tell-all. There was no documentary. She did a little bit in a documentary, but it was about bullying. She was interviewed in an interview her own that she did about bullying. So she was thinking of a larger world, right? This is a woman who, look, she made a bad decision at 20 years old. I have a kid who's 18, a kid who's 21, along with some young kids. And, they're not the smartest tax in the box all the time on certain decisions they make, they just don't. They just make mistakes. And so the 20-year-old who was in a really unusual situation made a bad mistake that was the rest of her life. The rest of her life. So I was really interested in that. And how could she have remained so graceful and kind? Well, everybody else wasn't. Nobody was, not the FBI, not the Clintons, not the right wing, not that was attacking them, not anybody. They were terrible. Everyone used it to their own advantage or for defense or whatever. And so I did this interview with her, and I just thought I thought, what a remarkable person. I don't know where she'll go down in history, but I felt really good about that interview. And the last question I asked her, I thought was particularly moving, which I said, what would Monica have been like if this had never happened? And she gave an answer that just knocked the wind out of me, about what you should listen to it. It's really moving. Similarly, Maria Ressa, who is a person who won the Nobel Prize, but I had known her for a long time. She had done a version of All Things D in the Philippines, essentially. And that's how I met her. She came to me. She goes, I'm thinking of starting something like yours. And she was attacked by the Duterte administration, jailed, put in jail or threatened with jail. I think she was in jail for a short period of time. Nonetheless, the government went after her because she was telling the truth. And she did she was the one that warned me about misinformation. One of the first people. I would attribute it to her. And she, we ended up talking about her parents and her personal life when she couldn't leave the Philippines, the possibility that she'd be jailed there for doing nothing but her job. Was very touching, and I try to get to the human element. And in the same regard, some of my interviews with Steve Jobs, I think, were really terrific. This is a guy who's really changed our world in terms of how we compute, how we use these devices, thinking about him, his theories and things like that. And even though he wasn't a technologist, he knew technology, but he wasn't a technologist, but he really was a visionary in terms of things. And I go back, and the things he talked about have happened, right? Like podcasting or the way we interact with computers and mobile and everything else. And he made a lot of, he had a lot of problems personally, but not that compared to the new crop. He seems like a sweetheart. But he was a very passionate and interesting person. But when he was, he went through a lot of the stuff he did when he was dying, actually, during the years he was dying, a lot of the most important work he did. And he had a very big sense of mortality always. He was very dramatic, of course. A lot of these people are drama queens, but he had a very big sense of death. And I thought, and I do too. I think about it, mortality, a lot since at a young age I did, because my dad died when I was young. But when he was very sick, I did the last interview with him before he died. Really, the last significant interview with him. I think it was indeed the last one. He didn't do many interviews, long form interviews with people. And he was very sick, very thin again, and pretty clear that this was not good, what was happening to him. But he was so vibrant still. It was really interesting. He was more vibrant than most people in the room who were like wasting their minutes of the lives they have left, and he was using every minute he had. And I asked him, and I thought about it right before I asked, and I didn't prepare it. I said, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And the whole crowd was like, oh my God, this guy looks like he could die on stage, right? It was really quite something. And I thought, why not? I want to ask him what he's got. No one knows when they're going to die, right? No one has an idea what the number is of how many days they have left. But it was clear he was very not well, right? And he gave the best answer about a whole bunch of stuff. And it was disagreeable, and it was obstreperous, and it was vibrant, and it was really good. And you could feel the intake of breath of people in the audience. I can't believe she just asked that to a dying man. And I thought it was one of the best questions I ever asked. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? And he did. He answered it. He didn't care. That's why I liked him. He was a good, people who answer questions. He wasn't like, how can you say this to me? I'm obviously dying. He didn't think like that. And so, and neither did I. And so it was interesting. That was a great interview. That was a hell of an interview.
Speaking of tough questions, with our journalism students, learning how to interview and how to walk up to strangers and ask the big stuff. How do you get that confidence to ask tough questions when you're sitting across from Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whoever else?
You can't think of anybody as but a human. I know it sounds silly, but that's true. You have to stop thinking of your next interview. By the way, that's the first thing, is you can't think, oh, I'm never going to talk to this person again. So what do you want to know? Like, you can't, a lot of people with beats especially try to have access. Access journalism is a road to nowhere. As you can see by the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson, which is an access journalist. He really pulled his punches. And there's a lot of sourcing problems because everything's coming from Elon's mouth, and Elon's persistently lies. And so or else it ends up being a he said, and you're like, no, someone here is lying. Like, go find out, please. For me, as a favor to me, would you find out which one of these people are lying? And I'm going to guess who's lying on this particular story. But I don't. Your
interview with Walter was amazing, by the way.
It was great. I wanted to press him on it because I like him. He's a friend of mine. And so I think he does a nice job. But these, great man biographies, come on, give me a break. Like, come on, stop it. Like, they're not. And so I don't like great man biographies. Some of them I do. Like the dead ones is fine. They can't talk back at you, so it's fine. I think you just go. I think you just go straight at them. Like ask them. Like I don't know. I asked Carly Fiorina when she was running HP why she had never created any innovations. She was not expecting that question. She hadn't. She had done a lot of copying. She had done a lot of partnerships, but no innovations. It was all like she was a marketing person, so it was all smoke and mirrors as far as I was concerned. And I just asked her, or when I was when I'm trying to think of, I just asked them like, what? Like often my question is, what? Huh? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I have the information. One was with when I was with President Obama. You know, everybody says he's the president, right? Oh, look, the president. He's real tall, also, by the way, physically. Some of these people are a lot bigger than me, which is interesting. Physicality matters, right? I'm not big, so and you don't want to seem like a sort of like a chihuahua coming at people, like that kind of thing. So. One of the things I did with him is I really quickly determined he really likes to talk a lot, and he talks in paragraphs and everyone lets him. And he also does the cool operator thing. Like, just, I'm going to answer like this. And I thought, I'm going to get him mad. That's going to work here. You know, I knew it. I knew if I irritated him, it would get a good answer. And one of the things we discussed was encryption. And he had backed the FBI. I thought around Apple, it was problematic. And we had a real testy exchange about encryption. And he kept saying, well, if you knew what I knew, I'm like, don't go down that. Okay, you get the special reports that I don't get about everybody trying to blow up the world at everyone. I get it. But let's talk about the broader issue of encryption. And so we had a real testy. And what I wanted to do there was, he never gets a testy. He never, as president, I think he was 6 years in, and everyone says, yes, sir. Can we do this? And the thing that really prompted me to do it was when you interview the president, I was there early. You have to be there early. Everyone has to sit in place, you know what I mean, while they move and stuff like that, which is fine. I get it. I get the safety issues. But he had a glass, and they put a piece of plastic, like one of those, over a glass, so nobody drinks it, and nobody, I guess, poisons it. I don't know. I guess that's the thing. And I thought, oh, this is how this guy lives. Everything is covered. Everything is. And I thought, I'm going to challenge him because he gets to say the last word all the time. And so I'm going to not agree with him. And I didn't agree with him, which it was real. And I thought it worked really well. And so why was I able to do it? Because I didn't think I'd ever get another interview again. So I don't care. Like, and I wasn't rude. I wasn't, I also am not rude. I interrupt a little bit, maybe. I don't care. Like, I have a question. That's my job. And I think if you're snarky, I don't like that either. I think you have to be fair. You know your stuff. You have a point of view. You stick to it. I don't know. I wasn't ever disrespectful to people, but I don't give respect unless people earn it, I guess, in that regard.
What's it like dealing with these? A lot of them are men, the
All
CEOs
of them are men,
who,
so.
you know,
Not all
I bet a lot of people don't ask them tough questions like you do.
They don't. And I think a lot of them respect it. You know, everyone was like, I don't know why anybody comes back to talk to you. And I was like, well, they do though. Why? Because smart people like smart questions. That is I say that over and over again. Really smart. You know, they like to be challenged. They get sick of being licked up and down all day. They get sick of the enablers. Not all of them. Look, welcome Elon Musk today. He's surrounded by people who say yes to him all the time. Oh, yes, sir. That anti-Semitic tweet was great. Good job. No one says what the, you know, and the reason we're not talking is because I said, what in the world are you doing? When he did the Paul Pelosi tweet, you know, which was reprehensible. And I said, reprehensible. Well, how dare you? What are you talking about? He tweeted a conspiracy theory about an old man who was hit by a hammer in his home by a crazy QAnon guy. Like, are you kidding me? How dare you? What a lack of responsibility. Well, you own this platform and you're engaging in the kind of behavior that's so dangerous. And anyway, I can't. There's an expression, I can't with these people. And so those are the questions where I really have a point of view, and I don't mind saying my point of view. And I think smart people who are confident and who are adults really like that. So I get them coming back. Like I just did Dara Khosrowshahi, head of Uber. We had
Yes.
back and forth. Like you can't, he wrote me a note. He goes, that was really fun. Like he was like, he goes, you were really tough once again, but he liked it because he had to defend his position, and he's an adult and he can take it. Right.
Yeah.
And I wasn't mean. I was factual. I was disagreeable with him on certain things. I agreed with him on certain things. And we had a great discussion, and he liked it because he's an adult. People like Tim Cook are an adult, comes back time and time again. People like Mark Benioff, and an adult, Mark Cuban, an adult. The only person who I think shouldn't come back for interviews with me is probably Mark Zuckerberg, because all three have been really disastrous. Well, the one
gets so sweaty.
He gets sweaty in one, and then he said Holocaust deniers don't mean to lie in one. I don't know what he and I have I wouldn't talk to me if I were him. He seems to make errors all the time with me. Stupid errors, easy. You know, it's like I'm a pitcher, and every time he gets it bad, he does something bad. Like, I don't know why he does. I make him nervous, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't do an interview with me if I were him. I'd like him to, though.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. I like Threads. I wrote him. I'm like, I like Threads.
Yeah.
Does that count for anything? You still ruin democracy.
Maybe someday.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
Everyone in the audience, we've got the Q&A box open. If you've got questions for Kara, please submit them now. And I want to turn this over to one of our students, Faith Lee. She's editor of the yearbook, journalism major, and she's got a question for you, Faith, if you want to pop on and talk.
Excuse me.
Okay, here I am. Hi, I just have a quick question. I know you've been covering tech since about the 90s, and you've seen everybody from Steve Jobs to Elon Musk. So what has been maybe your most memorable or interesting time of tech to cover?
Wow, all of it. I've never gotten sick of it. It's just interesting. Someone was like, why haven't you changed? I do a lot of politics now, but I also, because tech and regulation I had to move here because of the pandemic, because of all my kids. But so I shifted the topic areas, right? I was covering sort of startups for a while, and then IPOs, and then sort of the boom and the bust, and then social media. So it changes. Like tech isn't everything now. And so it stays interesting. And now I'm sort of in a political zone. I'm spending a lot of time talking to regulators across the globe. Obviously, misinformation, it just changes. So it just changed the topic. You know, it becomes. So I guess it's like covering sports. I hate sports, but I'm the only lesbian in America who hates sports, but I really do. And I have all sporty children, which is terrible. But I'm sorry, your question. So I try to vary it. I never get sick of it. And I try to find interesting things. Right now, I'm super interested in two things. One is climate change tech. So I'm doing a lot of interviews around, obviously I'm doing AI because that's where the puck is. I ignored crypto almost completely because I thought it was a scam, as we can now see from the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. I'm interested in digital currency, but all currency is digital now. I mean, have you ever seen your dollar? Do you have a, I was like, do you have a vault where you keep your gold? Nobody does. All money is digital now in many ways.
Bob Menendez does.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's right. He keeps gold. That was cool, wasn't it? That was so weird and interesting. He needs to go to jail is really what needs to happen to him. But I switch topics all the time. And right now, climate change tech is a big issue again, probably because I have 4 kids and I want them not to be, die in a terrible ecological disaster. I spend a lot of time on misinformation now. I spend a lot of time on AI because of climate change and healthcare. I think healthcare is going to change rather drastically. So I'm not really writing about tech. Tech is everything. And so I tend to shift around quite a bit based on things. I'm doing a lot of electric vehicle stuff now, autonomous vehicle. I'm just learning. I'm riding and all. I just had a Ford 150 Lightning, which was, you must love in the Midwest. It's a really good car, but I think they'll have a hard time. I mean, the Ford 150 is the most popular car, I think, in America. We'll see if all those dudes and ladies will switch over, but it's a good car. It's a great car. So anyway, I tend to try to find really interesting people too. And of course, I'm constantly talking about lack of that men run too much of it, like that there's not enough diversity, not just gender, not just race, but age, background, political affiliation. There needs to be more diversity in the way things are developed, so that we have a much more have more of a commons than we do, because it's done by a very small group of people, some of whom more recently have gotten really down some weird conspiracy rabbit holes that are disturbing in many ways.
Also, I wanted to know what kind of influenced your decision to move from more of a traditional like print focus to having several or being on several podcasts.
I don't think about print at all. I never have. In fact, I got in trouble when I was in my 20s when I was like, I don't read the print paper. Young people don't. I read it online, right? This was at the dawn of the internet age, and this was when it wasn't very good. And so I always thought I got in trouble with my boss. Like, can't say you don't read the newspaper. I'm like, nobody reads the newspaper who's under like 70. And so I used to have big arguments with them. I was like, they won't. Why would they? Why would you care where it comes from? And so I was always interested in a multi-platform approach. At one point I said, if they want to print it on salami and our readers want to eat it, let's do that for them. And so I always thought it was important to shift from platform to platform, even back to traditional ones. I worked for the New York Times for a while. And it was interesting, and I just didn't need him as much as I thought I did, but I liked working there. I thought I did some great, I think you only have so many good columns in you. So I did them and then I left. But which was a surprise, I think, to them. But I like to mix it up, and I like to think about, I think a lot about them before I get on them. We're doing a lot of stuff right now I wasn't late to TikTok. I just didn't understand what I should do there. Like, I like to think about it. And then some things I just jump into. Podcasts, I was like, I get it. And I ran right there 10 years ago. And I was right. I was like, I get why this is going to be powerful, because it's a fan base, because it's emotional, because it's flexible, it's intimate. And so I like that. I'm super interested in video right now, but I'm doing a bunch of different things. So we'll see. I just shift. I don't really care where I'm, I do a lot of live events. I think they're great too. I made a lot of money from live events. So
they're really good podcasts too. A lot of these
they
events you've been doing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're good. I'm good at it.
I think Faith has got some audience questions now for you.
Sure.
Yeah, so you were talking a little bit about your interest in misinformation. So Kim Charles asked, in an attempt to minimize disinformation, how feasible is it to add metadata to media content to strengthen the source and copyright with technologies such as NFTs to ensure that metadata cannot be removed or altered?
Yeah, I think the provenance is I've talked about provenance for years. You got to know where it comes from, because I was a propaganda studies major at SFS, at Foreign Service School. I wanted to go into the CIA or the military intelligence. Again, I was gay, couldn't go in the military. It was don't ask, don't tell back then. Kids, look it up. It was sucked. My dad was in the military. I was hoping to do that. But neither here nor there. I studied propaganda. That was what I really looked at. And propaganda is the same no matter what. It's repetition, it's confusion. There's all kinds of basics of propaganda that never change. They just get better. They get better at it because of the tools get better and easier to make and stuff like that, and more convincing, essentially. And so I think provenance is critically important, not just for propaganda, but also for ownership, that people aren't sucking up other people's content. The way YouTube did the way it grew was taking other people's content until the jig was up and they had to pay, right? But they got a business out of it. Same thing, Amazon didn't have to pay sales taxes for years and benefited from that over other retailers. And then the jig was up and they had to pay, right? But they were already big by then. And so I think provenance is really important, because if you don't know where something comes from, you really can't trust it. And then it opens the gate I'm always assuming manipulators are going to manipulate. I think one of the problems with tech people is they always assume up and to the right and everybody's acting logically. I think they don't seem to understand that people will use these things for malevolent means, right? And I always do. I always assume whatever you have as a tool can become a weapon. And how does it be? And I think a lot about how things become weapons. And one of them is by confusing where information is coming from. So I think it's critically important to have that. It's in that AI bill, the provenance and of where AI comes from, where the data comes from, what's in there, what should be taken out. There's a good piece in the Washington Post today about that, how they were doing LLMs, these large language models, and what they put in and the decisions. These are people making decisions of what's in these things. And some of them are very straightforward. Medical databases are mostly pretty clean. But others, there was one that was really interesting. When they put in Latin woman, they were pulling from pornography sites at the same time as other things. And of course, it was all sexy lady pictures, which is ridiculous. And so they changed it. They pulled those pornography things out, and then you got more depictions. But of course, when you depicted hardworking people, it was always white men, right? Well, that's ridiculous. It's just so that's because that's what's in the database. And so I think provenance of where it's from, where you pulled it from, is critically. And I don't know if everyone's going to look at it, but if it's there for people to see, it's like food, right? You got to know what's in your food, or else you end up, with red dye number 2 or whatever. You have to know what provenance and what's in ingredients are really critically important to understand. And it should be legislated. That should be legislated.
Another question from Robert Valdova. He asked, for average non-tech readers and media consumers who don't understand journalism sourcing and how great man biographies can suffer from bias, what is the best way to get this message across?
Oh, people often believe what they read. That's the way it is, right? I don't know this is not a new problem. I think we have not taught young people ever, and for a long time, to think critically. I think the way I have all kinds of issues with our educations, is one of which is critical thinking. We do a lot of rote thinking. We don't do media literacy. I think media literacy is critical to understand how things are put together. I think journalists are at fault because we pretend. Let us not tell you how we make things, right? Let's not be honest. One of the things we did at All Things D, now it must be almost 20 years ago, at least 15 years ago, is I wrote a whole long disclosure. Like, this is how we make these things. This is what we're doing. This is our sourcing. This is what we do. Now, maybe everyone didn't read it, but we disclosed everything. Like, we just did. And I was like, look, my readers are smart. They can figure out what we're doing. They can imply bias, or we just tell them. What's happening here. And every single reporter had every story was linked to their disclosures, their various disclosures. And not just that, we said, this is how we are doing this. This is how we're doing this. This is why we're using sources. And I'll tell you why. And we talked about it openly. And this is where we think it's our opinion. This is our analysis based on what we've done. People like that so much because they felt like, this sort of on high idea, it is easy to attack, and it's easy to be malevolent, when you do it, right, as a journalistic organization. And I think you have to think about the readers all the time. And so constantly was in dialogue with readers about things. Now, and I didn't always agree with them. And they would be like, there was one guy who kept getting in the comments and kept saying really homophobic stuff in the comments. When Steve Jobs was dying, he, for some reason, decided he had AIDS and kept putting terrible things in our comments. And so I blocked him, and I kept blocking him. And at one, he's like, you can't stop me. I have every right to talk. I said, you have every right to talk, but not on my website. Get out of my bar. Like, get out of my fucking bar, you horrible, terrible person. And I barred him like every time. And, and I do that on Twitter. And it's like, you can't comment. I can't comment on your, I said, no, you can't, because this has become a toxic waste zone. You go somewhere else. I don't have to talk to you. In real life, I don't have to talk to you. Why should I have to talk to you here? And so I do that a lot. And so I take away that power of, I must speak. I was like, go speak to your dog. I don't care who you talk to, but I'll listen to you if you're civil. Otherwise, get off my porch, essentially. So I do that. But that's me, I think journalists should do that more, push back at people too. I think they're scared of their readers. I'm not scared of my readers at all.
That's good.
Yeah.
You were talking about Twitter there for a minute. Do you think Twitter gets better ever again?
No.
I heard you say the other day that you were hearing that Linda Yaccarino might get the axe.
Oh, I think she's going to. I just think he's not. Well, I don't know. She might have they call her the pain sponge at Twitter, at X or whatever he wants to call it. Again, he bought it. He can call it Phyllis if he wants to. I don't care. But he should have called it Phyllis. It would have been more fun. That's a name that doesn't get used very much anymore, isn't it? I think she can't last. Nobody lasts with him. He sucks the life out of people. It's very Trumpian in that regard. Look at all these lawyers and ex-Trump people. They're all either going to jail or testifying against him, and this is what happens. Like everything Elon touches in this regard, not in his other things. By the way, I have a lot of regard for SpaceX and Tesla to an extent. I think it's under a lot of pressure right now because of competition, but that's okay. It's just a business. It's a car business. But I think the way he's behaved at Twitter is really appalling. And, he's just, he's on this weird personal journey that he happens to be the richest man in the world, so he can do it. He can do whatever he wants. He's the richest man in the world. Right. So yeah. I just think that she won't last, but maybe she will. Maybe she's a pain sponge that can absorb more pain, but that's all she's doing is absorbing pain from this guy. And who knows what he's going to do next. He's been quiet recently. It's interesting. He started tweeting really pretty heinous accounts at the beginning of the conflict in the Mideast. And I think he's pulled back a little bit, kind of stuff. So.
What kind of news do you consume on a daily basis? Where do you go to read things, listen to things, watch? What are you watching? I'm curious your
everything
diet.
Everything. I watch a lot of I read all the major newspapers because I think they're good. And if there weren't, I wouldn't look at them, and I don't always agree with them, but I read everything. I read a wide range from conservative stuff to very liberal stuff. I tend not to get to the edges because I'm like, oh, stop, but I pay attention to it. I look at Fox. I look at some of the cable stuff. I just want to see how they're portraying things. I read a lot of newsletters now because I think some of them are fantastic. I think Puck is really good. I read Casey Newton. I read all kinds of Substacks and in that genre, not just Substacks. People are doing a variety of things. I think some of it's quite good, like really smart. It's weird. There's this lawyer named Eric Gardner at Puck who you'd think I'm not interested in legal stuff, but he writes about tech legal stuff a lot. And I didn't know, and I think he's quite adept, and I like his thoughts. I look at social media a lot less because I'm not getting a lot of wisdom out of it. I just am not. It's just more breaking news kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I read, I'll go to I don't go to movies in person. I went to one this weekend. I took my 4-year-old to see the Taylor Swift. I went to the Taylor Swift concert, but I took her to go to it, and we had a great time. That was she's a flawless media entrepreneur, boy.
Yeah.
And she's a really smart business person. You can I'd love to interview her about business and not talk about boyfriends. I don't want to talk about boyfriends. I don't want to talk about Gaylor. I don't want to talk about Travis or whatever the hell is going on there. And I want to talk about her business. Like, I want to understand her business mind. I'd love to talk about that with her. Or I don't want to talk about lyrics. Everyone's there's such a world around her that's so fascinating. The Taylorverse. I do everything. Like last night, I was watching the morning show because I think it's quite good, actually. It's surprising. It's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs on that show, but I like it because they're talking about streaming. They're actually smart about it. I was like, oh, that was really smart. Or they're talking about the death of media, like big media broadcast stuff, and I think Jennifer Aniston's doing a great job there. The whole cast is astonishing. Every single person on the cast is really good. So I want everything. Just lots of things. I read lots and lots and lots of stuff. I read local papers. And
let me
books,
give you one last question before we let you go here. For our journalism students, what's your best piece of advice for up and coming reporters of any platform?
Oh, well, it's stupid, but you have to be curious and interested. I think if you're interested, you're interesting. I think you have to not be unfair. I think you have to not be snarky. I think it's really, everyone's like, sometimes people are like, Kara, you're so mean. I'm like, I'm not mean. I'm asking direct questions. Actually, if you listen to it, people are like, oh, I thought you were mean, but you're not. I'm like, yes, I'm direct. That's different, right? And I don't believe in snarky questions. I don't believe in gotcha. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're not getting your answers, and then you're narcissistic and you're not getting answers. I think you need to get answers. You want to get answers. So you want to do your homework. You want to really get answers out of people. That's your job, is to ask questions and get answers. And I think that's not going to change with the medium. It really isn't. It just isn't. And lean into your creativity, because you need to. One of the things that unfortunately is happening because the industry is contracting is that everyone's in a terrible mood. Like, I can't believe this was done to me. Right. Well, guess what? You know, wherever you are, you're at the University of Illinois, right? You guys are lucky people. There's people across the world who are not lucky, who are stuck in places all across. You could point to any place in the world where people don't get education, where they don't get to do, and we have enormous problems in this country: the gun problem, the drug problem, the polarization, etc. We're blowing what is a really good attempt to get to the best of people, and we certainly haven't in our history and everything else. But you're very lucky to be where you are. And I don't say you should be like, oh, you're so lucky, shut up. You shouldn't shut up, but you should understand you have choices that other people don't, and so you should make them. And if you don't like something, figure out a way to do something you like. And that's one of the things I have to say. Every day I wake up, and if I don't like, and I'd recommend an essay by Steve Jobs. He did a Stanford speech that he did. I listened to it, actually. And he says, every day I wake up, and if I don't like what I'm doing for enough days in a row, I stop. You don't have a long life. You really don't. You really have to think like that. You have to think about the time you have on this planet and how quickly it goes, and that what are the things you want to do and what are the things you want to make. And if you make things, you really can't go wrong. And you have to think like that as a journalist. It's sometimes it's other people's fault, but a lot of it, you can get up and do things more than you have more power than you think. Don't abrogate your power to other people. And that I see happen over and over again, is we give up power to those who are not adequate to the task and shouldn't have our power. Whether we give up information to websites or everything else, this is ours, and we should not be so cheap with ourselves. And that's one thing I think about. I tell a lot of journalists, a lot of people, a lot of kids, my own kids, so that's it. I don't know.
That was great. Thank you so much for being with us.
All right, good. How's Illinois? My son's at Michigan.
Oh,
He's like, are you talking to Illinois? I was like, oh, stop it. He's now become a blue person. Like,
oh gosh,
he calls me and yells "Go Blue" at me all the time, and I have to hang up on him. And it's like, I don't care. Anyway,
well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Good luck. Goodbye, Faith. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Colleen. Bye.